Okay, this is Chapter 10, Democracy in America, 1815 to 1840. So this chapter is going to talk about the presidencies of Madison and Monroe and a little bit of John Quincy Adams, a lot of Andrew Jackson, and it's going to end with Van Buren and Harrison. And an ongoing theme throughout this chapter is the triumph of democracy. States are going to get rid of the property requirements that restricted the vote to white men that owned property, and by 1860, almost 90% of white men were able to vote, but unfortunately, that was not something that was widespread throughout the entire country. So blacks still could not have full equality before the law, and only 4% of free blacks were even able to vote in 1860. Democracy in America was associated with whiteness. Racist depictions of blacks were widespread and ever-growing, especially after the Civil War. And this idea of racial superiority and African-American inferiority was even supposedly backed with scientific basis, which obviously is unfounded. Moving on to the American system, this was Madison's plan for economic development for the country, and that involved a new national bank, which proved to be important after the War of 1812, a tariff to protect manufacturing and to promote manufacturing, and federal financing of roads and canals. So the National Bank will be brought back after the War of 1812, and this is the second bank of the United States. But many Americans resented it. They saw it as a profit-making corporation. Andrew Jackson called them non-producers and really resented this bank. So we're going to have a panic in 1819. The banks are going to continue land speculation, so land is bought and then resold to make a quick profit. Eventually, dropping land prices are going to ruin farmers and businessmen. It's going to have a crescendo effect. Banks will fail when farmers can't meet their payments, unemployment rises, and the bank was blamed for the panic, and states are going to retaliate by taxing their local branches. A very famous Supreme Court case, McCulloch versus Maryland, the bank was ruled legitimate, which contradicts the strict constructionist view. So now even the Supreme Court is in favor of the bank, and it's going to be here to stay for a while. But otherwise, this era was known as the era of good feelings. James Monroe was elected almost unanimously the second time in 1820, receiving all but one electoral vote. John Quincy Adams received one vote, and he won handily in 1816. The Federalist Party was pretty much dead at this point. The War of 1812 really hurt their popularity. So there was no direct party opposition, but there were political opponents all competing for the presidency. So we're going to see politics become organized around competing sectional interests. So you'll have candidates in the North and the South and the West. And the issue that is going to threaten to disrupt the entire country and disrupt national unity will be the issue of slavery. The Republican Party will actually split on the Missouri question, and that has to do with the Missouri Compromise. We had an even number of states that were slave and free in 1820, and in order to keep that balance, Missouri became a new slave state, and Maine was a free state, so that kept the balance, 2 more states added. And slavery was prohibited in territories north of 36° 30 line, which can be seen right here, in land that was part of the Louisiana Purchase. So any future state north of that line will become free, and any future state south of it will become a slave. In foreign politics, the Monroe Doctrine, which was actually written by John Quincy Adams, who was Monroe's Secretary of State, the United States is declaring that if any European power interferes with Latin American countries, then they will have to deal with the United States directly. So the United States was exerting their power as the dominant country in the Western Hemisphere. They wanted to be involved in trade with these countries, and they wanted to keep Europe out. And a lot of European countries were very interested in the Americas. France, Spain, England, and even Russia, all countries that were in contention for land. So here is an image of the North and South America. Cuba was hotly contested, and some Central American countries as well. Russia was exerting its influence down the West Coast. So this was a tremendous achievement for the Monroe administration. The election of 1824, as we spoke about before, with the sectional candidates, Andrew Jackson was the one national candidate that was well known. He was a military hero from the War of 1812, representing Tennessee in the West. John Quincy Adams, former Secretary of State, son of President Adams, represented the Northeast from Massachusetts. Henry Clay was the Speaker of the House, also from the West, from Kentucky. And representing the South was William Crawford, the Secretary of War and Treasury previously. Jackson received the most popular votes, but since there were 4 candidates, nobody received a majority. So, according to the Constitution, the House of Representatives gets to pick from the top 3, and Henry Clay came in 4th place. And since he had a large influence in the House of Representatives, many people believe that there was a corrupt bargain struck in which Clay helped Adams get the presidency, and then Adams gave him the top job of Secretary of State. In actuality, Clay's political views were more aligned with Adams than Jackson's, which we will be talking about. So you can see the many different states and how varied they were. Ohio and Kentucky and Missouri, these are all states that went to Clay. Adams is going to carry the Northeast. Jackson's going to carry votes throughout the South. So it was clear that Jackson had a large popular vote, but he did not have a majority, only 43% of the national election. So Adams will become the new president. Adams sought to increase the power of the country. He wanted to peacefully acquire Canada, Cuba, part of Mexico. He wanted a strong national government that would have a national college and lots of internal improvements to really take the country to the next level, promote agriculture and manufacturing. Unfortunately for Adams, Congress approved very few of his programs. Congress at that time wanted a limited role for the government. Martin Van Buren is going to organize the Democratic Party, Jackson's right-hand man, and he believed political parties were good for a republic, offers voters a choice, and also to kind of keep the sectionalism down. You can unite candidates from the North and the South if they're all aligned to the same political party. So the election of 1828 will go to Jackson easily over John Quincy Adams. Jackson forever, we see the sign here, hero of 2 wars and of Orleans, man of the people, Old Hickory. So we see here Jackson won handily by almost a 2-to-1 majority. So the age of Jackson. Jackson was a self-proclaimed champion of democracy, although he excluded Indians and African Americans from his vision of freedom. Strong nationalist who believed the states, not the federal government, should govern. And he's going to incorporate the spoils system where new administration officials will be appointed based on their devotion to the political party. He believed it was getting more people involved in democracy, but also some way of seeing it is that it was not the best qualified people for government positions. The Whigs are the party that is going to unite against Jackson, calling him King Andrew I. The Whigs were a political party of England, and that's where the name comes from, because in England the Whigs opposed the king, while here in America they opposed Andrew Jackson. So these Democrats are your farmers, your urban workers, your upcoming businessmen. They want the government to avoid interfering with the economy. So there was a strong support in the South for Jackson. The Whigs are your bankers, your businessmen, your large farm owners who support the American system, developing the economy, internal improvements, tariff. Speaking of the tariff, 1828, a tariff was passed which is going to raise taxes on imported goods. And Southerners opposed it because they believed they were paying for the North's profits. Because the North had manufacturing and the South didn't have a lot of it, they called this the Tariff of Abominations in South Carolina. And hearkening back to the days of Jefferson and the Kentucky resolution, the idea that if a state doesn't like a law, they have the power to nullify it. And John Calhoun was Jackson's vice president. He's going to argue that states created the national government, so each state retains the right to prevent laws within its borders that exceed the power of the Constitution. Senator Daniel Webster believed that the people created the Constitution, therefore nullification is illegal and treasonous. And of course, Andrew Jackson will agree as well. So the nullification crisis offers the South a political philosophy when sectionalism is intensifying. And if you look deeper into the issue, you can see South Carolina is worried that the federal government can come down upon them on any issue, and what if slavery was to come up in the future. Nullification gives them an opportunity to fight any law that they feel is unjust. But to Jackson, who is a nationalist, nullification is disunion. So Jackson persuades Congress to allow him to use the military to collect the tariff. They passed the Force Act. And Clay and Calhoun are going to come up with another compromise tariff in 1833, which will allow South Carolina to rescind their nullification. So the crisis was averted, but this issue will come back in the future. There's John Calhoun, and at a White House party to celebrate Jefferson's birthday, Calhoun tried to trap Jackson on the nullification issue. Calhoun actually wrote 18 different toasts for people, and when it was Jackson's turn to give a toast, he's going to rise up and challenge to everybody present, "Our federal union, it must be preserved." And Calhoun's going to rise up and say, "The union next to our liberty, the most dear." So these two did not get along as a result of this. Jackson is going to secure passage of the Indian Removal Act in 1830, which will set the stage for the Trail of Tears, which will actually be carried out under Van Buren's administration. But this allowed for the removal of tens of thousands of Indians east of the Mississippi River. And the Cherokee Indians, who adopted to the white man's ways, had their own constitution, started their own schools, had an English newspaper. They appealed to the Supreme Court to protect their land rights guaranteed by treaties. But the court, John Marshall's court, said the Indians did not own their land. And the second decision, they were not citizens. The third decision will reverse the judgment, but Jackson refused to enforce it and let Georgia expel the Cherokee anyway. So this is the Trail of Tears. We can see Native Americans being transported across the Gulf of Mexico. The most famous one, though, was overland, where scores of Native Americans died along the way. The Bank War. The bank is going to overissue paper money, which reduces the real income of wage earners. Jackson thought hard money, gold and silver, is the only honest currency. And when Congress extended the bank's charter 20 years, Jackson is going to veto it and fight it. He's the first president to use the veto as a weapon. Jackson's going to win. He will destroy Nicholas Biddle's bank. And without federal deposits, the bank is going to lose its ability to control the state banks and keep them in check. So the state banks will issue more and more paper money, and the value of the banknotes will go from $10 million in 1833 to $149 million 4 years later. These prices keep rising, the wages will go down, and all of the speculation in the land for the western land will prosper, but then we're going to see a collapse. In 1836, the government sold 20 million acres of land, most of it paid for in paper money that had questionable value. Meanwhile, in Britain, a recession dropped the demand for U.S. cotton, and all of this will turn into the Panic of 1837, which was the worst depression in American history at that time. Martin Van Buren comes to office right when the panic is beginning, and not going to fare too well. One good thing that comes of it, an independent treasury system is set up, which will separate the national government from the bankers, which will last until 1913. This is an 1837 engraving blaming Jackson's policies for the economic depression. He did kill the bank, and bad times came right after. 1840, William Henry Harrison, the new Canada